Dawn broke slowly over the scorched expanse of the Iraqi desert, its pale light struggling through a haze of smoke and distant fire. It was January 1991, and the opening phase of Operation Desert Storm had already transformed the skies into a battlefield. High above the chaos, where the horizon curved gently against the thinning atmosphere, two F-15 Sea Eagle fighters cut through the cold morning air with lethal precision. At their controls sat Captain Cesar, Rico, Rodriguez and his wingman, Craig, Mole, Underhill, men trained for this exact moment, yet aware that no training could fully prepare them for what lay ahead, because somewhere beyond the empty sky, unseen eyes were already watching, already calculating, already preparing to strike. Their mission had been issued in clean, clinical language: establish air superiority, neutralize threats, protect the strike package. Simple in wording, brutal in execution. Behind them, a formation of F-16 Fighting Falcon jets descended toward heavily defended targets near Baghdad, their silhouettes briefly illuminated as bombs released and fell like silent verdicts toward the earth. Seconds later, the desert erupted, columns of fire clawing upward, shockwaves rippling across the barren landscape. Even at altitude, Rodriguez could feel the distant tremor through the aircraft's frame. But up here, above the fire and fury, there was a new stillness, an absence that felt wrong. Because in war, silence rarely meant safety. It meant something was coming. Inside the cockpit, the world narrowed to instrumentation and instinct. The glow of radar screens painted Rodriguez's vision in shades of green, each sweep a question, each return a possible answer, or a deadly miscalculation. The voice of the airborne controller crackled intermittently in his headset, calm but edged with urgency, feeding them fragments of a larger picture they could not fully see. This was modern warfare: data, signals, coordination across invisible networks. Yet despite all the technology, it still came down to a human being, alone in a cockpit, making decisions that could not be undone. Miles away, rising from Iraqi airfields scarred by previous strikes, another force climbed into the sky. The MiG-29 Fulcrum, fast, agile, and deadly in capable hands, carried with it the pride of a nation under siege. Their pilots knew the odds. They understood the technological gap, the overwhelming presence of coalition air power. But they also knew something else: air combat was never decided by machines alone. And as their engines roared them toward the incoming threat, a plan was already unfolding, one that would turn the vast sky into a chessboard where every move could mean life or death, and where one wrong assumption could draw the Americans exactly where they wanted them. Rodriguez adjusted his heading slightly, eyes flicking between instruments and the endless blue beyond his canopy. Somewhere out there, the enemy was closing fast. At supersonic speeds, distances vanished in seconds. There would be no time for hesitation once contact was made. His training whispered protocols: identify, lock, engage, but experience told him something else entirely. The first moments of any encounter were chaos, confusion, uncertainty. And it was in that uncertainty that pilots lived or died. The controller's voice returned, sharper now. Contacts. Bearing confirmed. The words sliced through the calm like a blade. Instantly, the atmosphere inside the cockpit shifted. Rodriguez felt it, not fear, not yet, but a tightening focus, a sharpening of every sense. His radar began to sweep more aggressively, searching, probing. Then, for a fraction of a second, something appeared. A return. Faint, but real. And then, gone. As if whatever had been there had simply slipped into the void. Rodriguez frowned slightly, adjusting his angle, scanning again. Another flicker. Another disappearance. It didn't make sense, unless the enemy wasn't just approaching, but deliberately revealing themselves, then vanishing, playing a game that had already begun long before the Americans realized they were part of it. And far ahead, closing the distance at unimaginable speed, the two formations raced toward each other, hunters and hunters, though neither side yet knew which role they would ultimately play. In the vast emptiness of the sky, there was no cover, no concealment, only skill, technology, and the thin margin of decision-making under pressure. The moment of contact was inevitable now, a collision not just of aircraft, but of tactics, wills, and survival itself. If you're drawn to stories like this, where history unfolds in seconds and decisions echo for decades, consider subscribing and liking the video. It helps bring these real moments of courage and consequence to more people who might never otherwise hear them. Because what was about to happen in the skies above Iraq would not be a simple interception, but the opening move in a deadly game neither side could afford to lose. The warning came not as a shout, but as a controlled, measured voice cutting through the static, precise, professional, and carrying a weight that both pilots instantly understood. From far above the battlefield, an E-3 Sentry AWACS tracked the unfolding picture with sweeping radar that reached beyond the limits of any single fighter. Multiple contacts, bearing confirmed. The words hung in the cockpit like a quiet alarm, and for a fleeting second, Rodriguez felt the shift, the moment when uncertainty hardened into reality. Somewhere ahead, hostile aircraft were not just present, they were positioning, watching, and perhaps already anticipating his next move. Rodriguez's radar came alive with renewed intensity, its electronic pulse reaching outward in search of clarity. A blip appeared, sharp, undeniable, then vanished before he could lock onto it. He adjusted his heading slightly, compensating, scanning again. Another contact. Another disappearance. It wasn't random. It couldn't be. Beside him, Underhill reported similar readings, his voice steady but edged with confusion. The sky, vast and empty to the naked eye, had suddenly become crowded with ghosts. And those ghosts were moving with purpose. The Iraqi pilots flying the MiG-29 Fulcrum were not reacting, they were executing. By turning their aircraft perpendicular to the incoming radar waves, they exploited a known limitation of the F-15's detection system. In that narrow slice of geometry, they became almost invisible, reduced to fleeting echoes that appeared and vanished before they could be targeted. It was a tactic born of discipline and deep understanding, one that transformed the engagement into something far more dangerous than a simple intercept. Because now, the Americans weren't just fighting an enemy, they were fighting uncertainty itself. Again, a contact flickered onto Rodriguez's display. This time it lingered just long enough to tempt him. His instincts urged him forward, close the distance, force the engagement, regain control. But something felt off. The pattern was too deliberate, too controlled. Each appearance seemed to draw them slightly deeper, pulling them forward like a thread through a needle. And then it hit him, not all at once, but in a creeping realization that tightened his grip on the controls. MiGs weren't just evading detection. They were shaping the battlefield, guiding the Eagles exactly where they wanted them to go, step by step, second by second, toward a destination Rodriguez could not yet see, but instinctively knew would be deadly. The rules of engagement weighed heavily in his mind. In modern aerial combat, firing a missile was not just a tactical decision, it was a legal and moral one. Positive identification was required. Certainty was demanded. And in a sky filled with flickering radar returns and vanishing targets, certainty was a luxury they did not have. The AIM-7 Sparrow mounted beneath his wings required a solid radar lock to guide it to its target. Without that lock, it was useless. And the enemy knew it. Every second the MiGs remained elusive was another second they held the advantage. Contact, lost again. Underhill's voice cut through the tension. Rodriguez exhaled slowly, forcing himself to think, to analyze rather than react. The temptation to push forward, to force a confrontation, was growing stronger. But so was the unease. This wasn't how an outnumbered force behaved. These pilots weren't retreating. They weren't even truly engaging. They were luring. And the deeper realization began to settle in. This wasn't just a dogfight waiting to happen. It was a setup, carefully constructed, patiently executed, and now nearing its final stage. Then the controller's voice returned, sharper now, layered with urgency. New data. Expanded picture. And with it, a revelation that sent a cold clarity through Rodriguez's mind. The airspace ahead, closer to Baghdad, was heavily defended. Not just by aircraft, but by layered ground-based systems designed to turn the sky itself into a weapon. The flickering contacts, the controlled retreat, the deliberate invisibility, it all aligned with a single, chilling possibility. They weren't being drawn into a fight. They were being drawn into a trap. Rodriguez's eyes lifted briefly from the instruments to the horizon ahead. Nothing but open sky. No sign of danger. And yet, every instinct told him that beyond that empty blue lay something far more lethal than any fighter aircraft. Something that didn't need to see him to destroy him. Something waiting patiently for him to cross an invisible line. And still, the MiGs flickered on his radar, appearing just long enough to keep him moving forward, then disappearing again, as if daring him to follow. The voice from the E-3 Sentry AWACS was urgent. Coordinates updated. The threat enveloped Baghdad, surrounded by defenses. S-125 Neva batteries could destroy high-speed aircraft without hesitation. Once within range, survival was seconds away. Rodriguez gripped the controls as urgency settled in. The F-16 package approached unescorted. Turning back let the MiGs engage them, risking everything. If he pressed forward, he'd enter a missile zone aimed at aircraft like his. Time stretched as training and instinct collided in a decision. Withdraw to protect his aircraft or advance to shield others? No perfect choice existed, only consequence. Rodriguez stayed the course. The cockpit felt tense as warning tones flickered in the air. Underhill trusted Rodriguez, remaining silent. Ahead, the deceptively empty sky concealed danger. Every mile brought uncertainty. The situation shifted, revealing unforeseen peril. New contact, the controller warned sharply. It wasn't part of the flickering group, but closing fast. Rodriguez scanned his instruments, finding nothing. 13 miles away, a third MiG-29 Fulcrum remained silent, radar off. The realization struck. The first two MiGs had drawn him forward while this one maneuvered unseen. It was a classic tactic: distract, isolate, strike. Rodriguez was precisely where they wanted him. Instinct kicked in. He adjusted his vector, creating space between himself and the invisible threat. The MiG relied on timing. Surprise could be a weakness once revealed. Tension built in the cockpit. Every moment was deliberate. Closing in was a pilot confident of an advantage, believing the American escort was trapped. But the equation was shifting. In a heartbeat, the trap morphed into chaos, a fight neither could control. If you appreciate leadership under pressure, consider subscribing. These crucial stories deserve a wider audience. What happened next would unfold rapidly and determine who would survive. The sky collapsed into a narrow corridor of survival. At 8 miles, the threat became real. Rodriguez's radar caught a sharp return. A warning tone erupted in his cockpit. Both pilots understood. No more deception. The fight had begun. Each man committed to their next move. Hesitation meant death. The MiG-29 surged forward, closing the gap. Rodriguez felt the urge to fire but held back. The rules demanded visual ID within 10 miles. Seconds stretched, distance shrank, and advantage teetered. One hesitated, the other did not. The lock warning screamed. Rodriguez dove hard, releasing chaff as the Earth surged upward. The F-15 Sea Eagle pushed to its limits as a missile cut through the air where he had been. The immediate danger passed, but the fight grew brutal. Cleared to engage. This time, Rodriguez didn't hesitate. His radar locked onto the target, and he fired. The AIM-7 Sparrow surged forward, everything slowing as it closed in on the MiG. Impact erupted in fire and debris, the first thread gone. Yet, another contact appeared, closer now. A second MiG-29 raced past. No time for missiles, just pure maneuvering. They spiraled downward, locked in a deadly dance. G-forces crushed Rodriguez as he turned hard, pushing both to the limit. He edged closer, sensing the MiG losing energy. Then, the Iraqi pilot made a desperate dive toward the desert floor. Rodriguez followed, tracking the descent, waiting to fire. But the angle was too steep. The MiG failed to pull up. It slammed into the desert in a violent eruption. Silence followed. The sky exhaled. The immediate danger had passed, and the F-16 formation continued its mission. Rodriguez steadied his aircraft, breathing slowing as calm returned. In the vastness of the Gulf War, this was just a fleeting moment. But in those minutes, modern aerial combat was laid bare. Technology guided them, training sustained them, but decisions made in seconds determined survival. As the Eagles turned for home, one lesson lingered. Victory belongs not to the strongest machine, but to the one who acts and endures when it matters most.